Hey everybody, welcome to the QB School. I'm JT O'Sullivan. Today, Q&A. We're doing a lot of weather, rain, wind, snow, different systems and different weather. What's it all mean? I'm excited. Should be a good one. Thanks for the questions. Let's dive into it. Welcome to the QB School. Wind. All right, if you dig this kind of content, please subscribe to the channel, smash the notification button if that's a thing. I don't know how you do it, but I appreciate all the support. Again, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, notifications. I appreciate it. Let's get it going. All right, so we're in Q&A today, and if you couldn't tell from this sweet gear, we're talking weather. Got a bunch of questions about what it's like. It's that time of year. It's getting cold in San Diego. It's almost in the 50s. Craziness. In fact, it's actually getting kind of hot under the lights with the parka. Again, don't really rock this kind of gear very often. In fact, I got a little chuckle this morning. This is a really nice jacket. Back in the day when I used to have Nike money, I used to spend it on some pretty interesting gear. I've actually never worn this jacket before. It still has the tags on it. Pretty funny. It's good living out here in the Notto. But anyway, I'm excited. Let's dive into the Q&A, get it going here. First question, Black Phantasm. Hey JT, love your videos and have learned a lot by watching. Awesome stuff. Keep it up. I was wondering if you could go over how you, teams, coaches prepared for rain, cold conditions, wind, etc. I know you played in the CFL, so I'm hoping you could bring some light on what NFL teams do to play outside a dome in bad conditions. Yeah. All bad, especially for a California kid, and especially because most quarterbacks, I shouldn't say most quarterbacks, many quarterbacks, West Coast people, Cali kids. So it takes a while to get used to it, to be honest with you. I know, you always growing up, especially on the West Coast, you hear like what a disadvantage it is to, have to go play in cold weather games when those teams are used to it. They get a chance to prepare for it year round. And I think there is some truth to that. I know, personally, it took a while. It still takes a while to get used to it. And really, if you're not in it every day, you become numb to it, but numb for all the wrong reasons. I think that there is an element of, you have to at least have the experience in it to know what you need to be successful in cold weather. What I mean by that is it's not impossible to go out there and be successful and play football, throw it around, spin it, especially nowadays with some of the gloves that we're able to use to be able to throw. But again, if you don't have a system, if you don't have, what your body needs to stay warm, you're at a real disadvantage, in my opinion. And that's why I don't necessarily think, warm weather teams are at a disadvantage. I think warm weather teams that don't have a handful of guys who have played meaningful games in cold weather that at least can teach the younger guys on a team, like, this is what we need to do. This is what you need to wear. And, when you're at the NFL level, everybody's got every kind of gear possible. But still, there's a perfect blend. And for me, it was always about finding what I needed to be warm, but still be able to play. You can't go out there and look like the kid from A Christmas Story. You have to find like that blend of being fast, being warm, feeling like you can still move, throw, get around, but then also like function. I remember there was one game when I was playing for Detroit. We were playing at Green Bay. I want to say it was like the last game of the season, and we were getting smoked. And they told, Kitna was playing at the time, and they're like, JT, you got the next series. And it's like in the fourth quarter with like a handful of minutes left. And John looked at me, and I was like, my feet were essentially frozen. There is no way. I had been standing for, almost 3 hours outside. I was going to struggle. And he's like, hey, I got you. I'll go out there. And all we did, I think, was hand the ball off for like 3 times. But I mean, it was one of those things where you have to find a way to get yourself right for those games. And so for the games, it's a little bit different. I always used to give myself like little, almost like treats along the way. So the first quarter, I'd be like, nothing. I'm going just straight uniform. Second quarter, give me the jacket. Third quarter, I'm standing next to the heater. Fourth quarter, or standing next to the heater when we don't have the ball. Fourth quarter, I'm standing next to the heater the whole time. And so it depends, obviously, like how cold you are. But I remember early in my career, I was playing for New Orleans. We went to Cincinnati, played against Akili Smith. They beat us that day. But I remember being like, it's not that cold. And I don't even remember how cold it was. I don't think it was that cold. I think it was at like high 30s, low 40s. But like for me, cold. And I remember thinking, like, it's not that cold during the game because you got adrenaline going, you're fired up, but you're not playing, as the backup quarterback. So it's a little bit different. But then I remember going to run like across the field to like shake everybody's hands after the game. And I remember my toes on both feet were frozen. I was having a hard time running. It felt like I was like, had like weights in my toes. And so it was just like, I wasn't used to it. And so I don't think I ever really got used to it until I went and got traded up to Green Bay. And then you're in it every day. So not only are you practicing outside a lot, but you also have kind of the best available stuff all the time. So you can kind of tinker and kind of figure out what works for you. Practice one day you do this, practice the next day you do that. This hand warmer, this type of hands. Like I got to the point where I was changing out those hand heaters like every 15 minutes, a bunch of them. You got them on the bottom of your foot, you got them at the top of your foot, you got a beanie, you got a turtleneck thing. And I know in Green Bay, in fact, I still think that they do this. I looked really quickly for a Google search for Brett wearing it, but I couldn't find it. But I know Aaron still wears it. They have this amazing like white turtleneck, like crazy thick thing, and it's like a vest. It's like a fuzzy, like it's amazing. It's like wearing like the most comfortable blanket ever, but it's a vest with this thick, crazy thick turtleneck. But you still feel like you can move because it's not on your arms and it keeps your core warm. And I don't see any other team doing it. I don't know if like it's some person in Green Bay makes them, but I should have stolen one when I was there. But it was just one of those things where it's like, God, that thing is perfect. And then you hear other teams, when I was in New England, I'd always heard, I don't think he did at the time, but I've heard since then that Brady wears like a wetsuit when it gets really cold. I don't know if that's true or not, but what you got to figure out, the essence of it is you got to figure out what works for you. And if you've never been in the cold, you don't know. And that's why I think the practice thing is so important. I think that there is a point of diminishing returns where you can be outside just in spite of being outside when you can't get anything meaningful done as far as preparation, just to prove like, oh, we're tough, we're going to, deal with the elements, as opposed to being like, let's go inside, get some work done, and then go outside and figure out how we need to do it. And so it's one of those things for me. I always like the best teams. I thought the best way to do it was always do the walkthroughs inside in your indoor facility and then go outside and practice almost no matter what, unless it's so ridiculous that you can't even do anything. But even then, I think that there's still some value to toughing it out because it is so cold in some of these places. And I know I look like a clown like this, but like I remember walking out of the Green Bay facility a handful of times and I felt like it was like getting like stabbed with a sword. Like your breath just goes and you just feel like, oh, I don't know how I could function. And then sure enough, on Sunday, it doesn't matter, Sunday night or Monday night, like you're jacked up, you got adrenaline going, you're excited for the game, and you get into it. And it almost becomes a non-factor. I can't say that it was always a non-factor, but it was essentially always a non-factor. I think the thing for me that always gave me the biggest issue that I always feared the most, besides for just ridiculous wind, like where you can't function, you can't even throw 10 yards away from each other, which I had a handful of times in the CFL, is like a winter mix. Like that's the worst for me. Cold, but like not snow. Snow, I didn't think it was that big of a deal at all, besides as long as it's not like a ridiculous temperature. Snow is better than rain, in my opinion. And for a long time, when I was in the rain or in water, I didn't play with a glove. And I felt like looking back on it, it probably hurt me a little bit. When you get a glove that you really trust and you're in the NFL and you can switch gloves all the time, it's really not a factor to me, or at least it wasn't towards the end of my career. But when you're in winter mix and it's like cold, slushy, like sideways wind, rain thing, like that was the worst for me because it's cutting in your face, it's cutting in your eyes, you're freezing, you're wet, as opposed to snow where I feel like sometimes you can stay a little bit more dry. It's a little bit better footing. Everything is just a little bit smoother. And that was just my experience with it. And so for me, it's a combination of all those things. I think it's about being able to know what works for you. And that you get that from being around people who are in it and from being in it. I think there's no replacement for having to deal with it every single day, especially for a kid who didn't grow up in it, who doesn't, love to get out there and snowboard or ski or anything. I'm a lodger. And so like when I'm out there to work, and we need to know exactly what I can do to be as efficient as possible. But at the same time, like not waddle around. You got to be able to function and be able to play at a high level when you get an opportunity to play. So it's that fine balancing line. And I think you get it by being in it, by experimenting, by practicing, by talking to people who have done it for a really long time and realizing what works for you. And when you find it, you own it, You find a process and you go from there and you try to spread it to make sure everybody knows exactly what they need to do and not let it become an excuse. Because once you get past the like, it doesn't matter. It's the same weather on the other sideline. We got to know how to function in it. They know how to function in it. We're pros. Let's roll. That type of thing. Next question. Jace. Hey, JT, love the videos. Getting into the winter months where the elements come into play. I was wondering specifically about wind. At what speeds does it start to affect you? How much does practicing indoors a lot or in good weather throw you off once you step onto a field that has harsh weather? All right, so we're staying in the weather family. Wind, the arch nemesis of throwing the rock. To me, it's a fine line. Like there are tiers of like no wind, 400-yard passing day, a little wind where like it might affect some like touch throws if you are going up against it or with it. And what I mean by that is I don't know what the miles per hour are, but you can see it where all of a sudden if you throw any sort of touch ball, it's going to push it or slide it, or the nose is up, it's going to tilt it. Those type of things. That's kind of like that mid-tier where like you kind of pay attention to it. You know when you're going with the wind or against the wind. And then there's that final tier where it's like a hurricane. And it is so crazy that you can't play catch. Like you can't go out and warm up 10 yards apart. And that probably happened over the course of my decade-plus career. I'm going to say less than 5 times. And they were all in practice situations. They were all nightmares. But you just deal with it. And what I did was throw a lot of checkdowns. You know, whatever. Like, we're on to the next. We're handing the ball off. Like, there's no, like, you know, I'm not going to sit there and worry about it over the course of 12 years, 5 days of practice or potentially a game where it's so ridiculous that you can't even function. I think you get to the point where you realize, even if it is crazy windy, even if it is terrible weather, to stress about it all the time, then to go out there and be like, well, we're just going to run it, or I'm going to throw screens or checkdowns, you can still function like that. Very rarely is it so ridiculous that you can't do anything. And so the thing that I learned really quickly, and I got it from Brett more than anybody else, Favre, was when it gets wet, when it gets windy, you want to stay away from any sort of touch throw. Anything you got to get it up and over someone, like a in the hole, second hole, in route, little over the top post, maybe even a go route where you got to have a little bit more trajectory. And you want all drive throws. So we want to drive comebacks. We want to drive hooks. We want to drive, big posts, different ways where we're throwing it hard, cutting through wind, slants, hitches, all those type of throws. Those are the throws that I want to live in cold weather, especially windy games. I don't want to throw anything that I feel like I have to touch over someone, because it just has you feel like you lose the control of it when it becomes a real wind game. But when I was playing a game or in a real practice, besides for those 5 days where you couldn't literally warm up, the rest of them, I just wanted to focus on throwing the ball as hard as I could. I wanted to cut the wind. I wanted to cut the weather, make sure you get a good spiral, tight nose, and it's on. And so, I think that's the part where people, when you only see it on TV a handful of times a year, you think, how do they deal with this? Well, they're dealing with it every single day. And I think that you get to the point, especially when you have the weather, like in the league, you have access to so much good gear. And so it's really up to you to find out what works for you, especially nowadays with the gloves and all these different ways to stay warm. I just think that it's most quarterbacks, at least once they get into it a handful of times, they know exactly what they need, and you're able to go from there. Very rarely, and I'm trying to think over the course of my career, even in college, I can think of one really rain game where we couldn't function. But besides for that, most times everything is in, you're going. Handful of times, I know definitely in practice, I would be like, well, they're calling, all go or something, and I got to make all these throws down the field. If the seam's not there to rip it, I'm just going to check it down. Like, I'm not throwing like a touch ball down the field in this type of rain or those type of things. But, off and on, like not that consistent. You know what works for you. You want to stay in that space, especially when you have a good relationship with the play caller. Like, hey, I want to throw drive throws. I need to push it. I want to throw everything hard on a line. Let's find a way to match those things with what we're doing today. And so that's how I got through it. I think that's how most guys get through it. It's a combination of finding what works for you and tethering it to the system, the throws that you want to make, and not getting caught all of a sudden, making some crazy touch throw across your body, realizing that it's going to go 10 yards the other way because the wind's going to catch it. It's just about being smart, making good decisions, all the things that you always have to do as a quarterback. It's just kind of compounded in bad weather. You got to manage that as another variable. Next question, Iron Maiden 2112. Love the content on this channel. It makes it easy for someone who hasn't played to understand what is going on during a game and makes me appreciate the skill level more. I had a question. Could you go over the different systems in football, air raid, West Coast, running, etc.? What are the advantage, disadvantages to each, and what the systems QBs would look like? Did I say that right? To each, and what the system QBs would look like. Gotcha. And what does the location of the team affect the style? Cold weather, rain, dome, etc. Thanks. So tethered into weather, I get this question a lot actually on this channel. And so I'm probably going to have to do a better job explaining it than I'm going to on this, other than the fact that to me, all those systems, very few teams, especially it might be different at lower levels of football, but when you're in the league, all those systems to a certain extent have variations of all of those, of all the different systems, from running, West Coast, digit, even a lot of air raid elements nowadays. Very few of them are like, we're only air raid, we're only West Coast. I think the vast majority of them have roots in one of those systems, but I don't think any of the play callers would say, hey, we're only West Coast. Like, there are even teams that are West Coast terminology based that have a bunch of different variations from a bunch of different offenses. They all run the similar plays, and it's a copycat league for a reason. And so I don't know if I could even give a good answer to that. I know that I know it's easy for people to think like in clean categories like air raid, West Coast, digit, but like that's just not how it really works. All of them have different ways to be able to run a lot of the similar plays. And so I don't know if it's, if people really want me to dig into it, I could probably dig into it in the off season and be able to provide a much more kind of fluid, clear picture and show videos and all those things. But like, to me, it's just not that simple. It's not that clean. And it's not even really that fun. I think once you get past it, it's like, I don't tether myself to one system. I don't think most people could or should anyway. I know that you can get away with it at lower levels and say, I'm only air raid, I'm only West Coast, we only run the veer, like those type of things, or we're wing T. Like, okay, that might work for you, but I've always been someone who like, I want to take advantage of what our players are really good at, or what I'm really good at as a player. I don't necessarily want to say like, hey, I'm a system quarterback, or this is a system player, or we run a system like this. Like, to me, it's about maximizing the player's potential, and that means different ways to take advantage of it. And so it's just, let me know in the comments if you want to see that type of like system specific analysis. I could see that there could be value in it, but there's a lot of places that already do stuff like that. And so for me, it's about kind of trying to like tease out like the details and nuance of how all of those overflow to what's actually done in the game and how you play a lot of those plays. So, and then the other part about it is, regionally, what does it matter to? Do you think that there are some types of football that are different at different areas of the country? And I think that there probably are. I've never done like a kind of map analysis on it, but I would imagine that, it's a lot easier to throw the ball in California when it's really nice all the time, as opposed to somewhere, in the Northeast where you might get a bunch of terrible weather, starting early in the fall where, we've had like 3 days of rain. So those type of things where it's just different. And so, I'm sure that there are, I don't necessarily think that it really, really matters. I think you can throw the ball in bad weather. I think that there are some advantages to throwing the ball in bad weather. You always hear that the offense knows where they're going. It's a lot easier for the offense. I think that there's some advantages to running the ball, in cold weather. So it's like, there's pluses and minuses to both of them. I don't know if there's a way that I think of it like, oh, we're in bad weather, we can't throw the ball, or we're in good weather, it's stupid to run the ball. Like, I don't, that's not how I understand it, or how I think about it. And I think you do yourself a disservice when you think, oh, they're a cold weather team, they have to run the ball. Well, I don't know if that's the truth anymore. I think that there are ways to spread the field, running screens, jet sweeps, different ways to take advantage of the horizontal and vertical game that you can do in bad weather and good weather. And so, I think the game is evolving away from that kind of mindset. I think it's a little bit antiquated, but, there's probably some truth in the history about it. Yeah, probably there were some myths about like, oh, you can't throw the ball in cold weather. Well, I disagree. And so take it for that. Thank you again for the questions. I appreciate it. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Again, if you haven't already, please think about subscribing, hit the bell. I really appreciate the support. Thanks again. See you next time. All right, if you dig this kind of content, please subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, get the notifications, go nuts, smash it, whatever it's called. That sucked.